Welcome back. Hour number 2, and we are off to a terrific start tonight. Joining us this hour is a man who is literally world famous as being probably the foremost authority on the Bilderberg Organization. He is Daniel Estulin, and he's been a guest on the program, but it's been a long time, much too long, and he's back tonight. Daniel, are you there?
I'm here. How are you, sir?
Hey,
it's
good.
Great to be back on your show.
Thank you. I don't know how long it's been, but
I think it's been a long time.
How time flies. My God, it just amazes me. Now, you are...
How are things going with you guys?
Just sitting here with my jaw hanging open half the time, watching this stuff. The world is changing, Daniel, as you well know, so fast. It's all being planned. It's all being implemented. It's all orchestrated. It's diabolical. It's evil. It's deadly. We mean absolutely nothing to these people, the controllers, whoever they really are. Other than that, everything's wonderful.
Jeff, I am thinking back to, I think it was like in 2013, beginning of 2014, when my book Trans-Evolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction came out. You had me on, and we talked about some of the stuff, talking about the future of humanity, trans-evolution, post-humanity, and so on and so forth. And I remember people saying to me, this stuff is like science fiction, like we're looking at 100 years into the future. I said, about 6 months from now, it's going to be old.
That's the truth.
3 months.
Absolutely correct, Daniel. People do that. That's how they put things aside. That's how they dodge and deflect. They say, well, down the road, 100 years from now, that's 50 years away. That's science fiction. No, it's now. It's all now. And they just don't want, I don't blame them. They don't want to hear it. I want to play the trailer to your new film.
There's a lot of stuff. As you know, there are a lot of films out there on the Bilderberger Group and other kinds of, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations.
Sure.
But, my book, The True Story, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but, my book did sell 7.2 million copies. It's out in 68 countries. It's been translated into 42 or 43 or 44 languages. I've lost track. So I do have somewhat an authority.
Oh, you're the man. You're the trailblazer.
Issue.
A lot of people have ridden your coattails and tried to make a name for themselves. It all comes from you. You are the man.
Jim Tucker, he is the man that started this whole thing.
That's
God
right.
bless his soul, a long time ago.
Yes.
But we took it into the mainstream, and, you get a bird's eye view. I mean, you've read my book. You and I have talked about the Bilderbergers back when in 2007, when people were saying, Bilder what? What do these people do? Sounds like some wacky conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. What does it have to do with, extraterrestrials and aliens from outer space? And suddenly, there they are, these they who we knew remotely, were behind the coup d'etats and financial shenanigans, and killings of prime ministers and presidents. Mm-hmm. Suddenly these they, anonymous, faceless, had a name. We knew what they did. There was over 200 pages of documents in my book, The True Story of the Bilderberg Group. And suddenly everybody started talking about the Bilderbergers as being the it factor. Of course, it's not really the it factor. That's one of the things we talk about in the film. Because I think what people realized somehow, simplifying the whole thing, taking it to the lowest common denominator, is 4 old geezers sitting in a dark room holding hands, staring at a crystal ball, planning the world's domination. Well, things don't work that way in real life. It's a bit more of a complex world we live in. But basically what it comes down to, a lot of secretive and private organizations working together towards a common objective. And this is what this film is about, explaining how this is done, who these people are. It took us 4 years of actually working on this film, a couple of false starts, 11 countries, 13 cities, over almost $200,000 budget, which was totally paid by me.
Well, without question, this is going to be the most important Bilderberger development, probably since your original book. This movie...
Back in 2007, 10
That's
years
right.
ago.
This is going to stun people. We need to get this exposed as far as we can. Here's the trailer, so all of you can take a listen. You'll find it right under Daniel's name in the guest section at Rense.
Yes, we can win this war, but the first step necessary for actually winning is to know what the war is.
Imagine a private club where presidents, prime ministers, international bankers and generals, shoulders, and where the people running the wars, the markets and governments say what they never say in public.
Under the guise of saving banking institutions, which they saved temporarily, they were effectively taking unpayable debt, huge quantities of unpayable debt, and transferring it from private corporations to governments.
The primary goal is to defend the status of a unipolar world.
And the paradox of this project, this supranational European project, is the least popular it becomes with the people, the bigger mess it creates, the more power they get at the center.
The war against a concept of man which is evil.
Bilderberg, the movie, and I can't wait to see this one. You really put a lot of energy, and I can hear it in your voice. I can hear how you're talking about it. What more have you learned, Daniel, let's say in the last 4 or 5 years about this organization, this group? How much more of it is there? How diabolical, how evil is it? How deeply embedded into this so-called human species is it?
It's not so much what I've learned, because again, when I came up, with the idea of working on this book, because I come from the world of military counterintelligence, so we had a lot of access to a lot of this information because, again, the Russians been interested in these people since pretty much the beginning, since, just before the Bilderberg meetings took off in 1954, and, the whole idea of Atlanticism or transatlantic power elite circles post-World War II, they were up and running, about 48, 49. So again, the Soviets were very interested in these supranational structures, and they had a lot of, interest in learning what the Bilderbergers talked about in, beginning with 1954. But I think more than anything else, looking at my book and, the impression that we get from people after, hearing what they have to say about it, I think, again, it was the point of trying to have them understand that Bilderberg is just one of many such organizations. It used to have a lot more importance way back in the 50s and the 60s. It has changed somewhat over the period of time, especially in the last 20, 30 years, because, again, it's one of many. We could talk about the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. There are even more secretive societies, such as Penay Circle in France, which is founded, again, more or less about the same time as the Bilderbergers. But I think what's important to understand when we are dealing with this society is that one of the elements about Bilderberg, it was, the creation of the Nazi International, in the sense that you have, again, Bilderberg is your former NATO alliance, Western Europe, Canada, and the United States. And basically what had happened after the war, that a group of people all linked to the Nazi interests or the Nazi apparatus, financially, economically, politically, in Europe and in the United States, decided to take all the stolen loot, World War II loot, and hide it in South America and then bring it back to Germany in 1954, the same year as the Bilderberg meetings started. And again, when we're talking about the German miracle, which again took place in 1954, the famous German miracle wasn't, the German economy picking up steam as a result of German people working, and burning the midnight oil. It's because the loot, which
the spoils of war,
trillions of dollars, was brought back and used that money to create the Fourth Reich, but not in Germany, but via the European Union. And that's what European Union is all about. That's on the one hand, Jeff. But on the other hand, it was also a way of merging the two groups who fought each other in World War II, the Anglo-American winners and also the losers in the war, which is the Italians, the Germans, and the Vatican, using the Jewish money, the Rockefeller and the Rothschild funds, to fuse these two groups together into this post-World War, a transatlantic Western power elite circles, which is basically transnational capital class, as some analysts would call it. The idea of, dismantling or destroying.
And money, Daniel, money is a great equalizer. So the Fourth Reich, all these people willingly were melded together under the guise of complete domination and hegemony and more money. How much money is too much? You can't get too much.
It's a good question. I found there's a guy by the name of Baron Krupp, who's one of the 19th century German industrialists. They're one of the families that financed
K-R-U-P.
KRUPP.
PP.
2 Ps.
Yeah.
When we're talking about Lords of War, these are the real Lords of War. I found 3,024 bank accounts pertaining to these people. One extract of one bank account, there's 112 trillion, T for Toronto, $112 trillion. And if I found 3,024 and in one there's 112 trillion, I am sure this guy had over 300,000 or 300 million bank accounts, which we know nothing about. And if you start multiplying the 112 trillion in one by all these other accounts, that's the real wealth that you have in the world. Right. Which is why, again, the question begs an answer: why do they always talk about the Rockefellers and the Buffetts as the people who control the world's wealth, when the real wealth isn't measured in billions, but rather in trillions and in quadrillions of dollars.
Right. Absolutely. Amazing when you think about that. I knew about this so-called secret economy long ago. I had no idea.
Catherine Rustin Fitz, you've had her on a long time. Catherine is a good friend of mine. She's talked about this so many times, which is exactly, the same thing. About 2 years ago, it might have been 3, a report came out by these 2 investigators, researchers. One is American, the other one is from New Zealand and Australia. And they basically went back to the period of Richard the Lionheart in England. That's 1180. That's 837 years ago. And they basically traced the lineages, and the peerages and the heraldry of all the leading families since that time. And what they discovered is that 1%, that's 162,000 people who are all related to each other, Jeff, own more than 70% of everything for the past 837 years.
Wow.
And then there's another group in Western Germany, such as, for example, Sage Coburg. That's one of the, leading houses in Germany. They discovered that 70% of industry in Western Germany is in the hands of the old Saxon aristocracy. So these are the people, if you kind of look at the people who financed and supported Trump in the 2016 elections, these are the people who are the real power behind the throne.
When you talk about going back 37 years.
37 years, yeah. That's 1180. That's the period of Richard the Lionheart.
You mentioned something that caught my ear, and you said that they're all related. Now, there is talk about inbreeding and problems thereof amongst the elite and the world's most powerful. What do you know about that?
Well, I think it's pretty logical when you're looking at the pool of people who marry each other, who intermarry, and who have children with each other, to get to the point where you're going to have degenerate children, which is what you're having today. If you kind of look at the Spanish royal family, the Bourbons, and you look at physicality, the physiognomies of the people, they look degenerate, which is one of the reasons that the prince have been brought in.
That's right. No, they don't look right. There's something wrong.
They do not look right, by any stretch of one's imagination.
Not good looking enough for TV. Let's put it that way.
Not good looking, no, not at all. That's an understatement, Jeff.
No, it's like a fright film.
I wouldn't be so kind to them, yes.
We are looking at the year 2017. We are looking at what appears to be the overrunning of the European Union, which was carefully put together by these elite, if you want to use that term. And where are they going with it? Is it out of control? Have they let the genie out of the bottle? When you have millions of Muslims, and I don't want to get into a big argument about Islam and what it is or isn't, but to me it's more of a cult than an alleged religion. When you have one rape every 8 seconds in Europe, when you have people, 98% of which will not take jobs, who do not want to take jobs, and yet are being funneled into Europe by the hundreds of thousands constantly, and into this country, not in numbers so large, who's behind that, and what the hell are they doing?
Well, it's a good question. If you look at the whole process of Trump winning the elections, you can talk about, above the Trump-Clinton level, you can talk about the Rockefellers against the Rothschilds. Then we can go several levels or layers up, and you're getting into some very important people, historically speaking. But again, if you look at what has been basically happening over the past 4 or 5 years or so, the Rothschilds have scored, if you're scoring it as a baseball game, 4-0 against the Rockefeller crowd. The first one was Crimea, which is Rothschild's, again, victory against the Rockefellers. Then the second one was the whole thing about the migration, because on the one hand, you're using the migration to destroy, which is obviously a Christian civilization. You're creating discontent, you're creating ghettos, you're creating ways of bringing drugs into the country. Sure. Again, we're talking about being like thy neighbor. These people have nothing like a thy neighbor. So you're creating a completely different civilization amongst people which have nothing to do historically, ideologically, physically, religiously, with the Muslim world. That was the second victory. And of course, needless to say, creating havoc, because again, you need a lot of money to feed this, influx of people. If you're seeing what has been coming out on the press in Italy and Germany, Angela Merkel is resorting to forcibly taking people's homes away from them and giving it to the migrants. So that was the second victory against the Rockefeller crowd. The third victory was, of course, Brexit, and the fourth was Donald Trump. So you're looking at, and the reason we have this, because again, as Catherine Austin Fitts always talks about, the central banking warfare model, which has been up and running for the past 500 years since the discovery of America. That's, the creation of capitalist system. Well, that model is dead because, again, as Karl Marx used to say, you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. So what you're having right now is the system itself, which was behind the Clintons and company. That system is dead. The bankers, the financiers, the liberal crowd, that system is dead. And the people who've been running the system, you can go back, let's say 100 years, we need to go back 500 years. 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve, okay, they're up and running. 1944, the Bretton Woods. Then, of course, you have the assassination of President Kennedy. You have the removal of Nixon, through Watergate. Then you have Reaganomics, which is a way of expanding credit, okay? And then comes 1991, their ultimate victory, the Soviet Union melts away or falls apart. And that's where they have they become the owners of the planet Earth. But paradoxically, Jeff, this is the moment where they begin to lose power because, again, capitalism needs continuous growth and markets in continuous state of expansion. When the Soviet Union died, there were no more markets to take over. And so in 2000, we had the first, knockdown effect, which was, of course, the dot-com bubble. Then in 2008, you have the Lehman Brothers. In 2012, Barack Obama eliminates the Goldman Sachs and the JP Morgan crowd from his economic council. And then in 2014, he stops the emission or reduces it enough only to supply the United States. And then in 2016, we have the victory, Brexit, and Donald Trump. So again, what you're looking at is one system, the system representing the financiers, the bankers, and the liberal crowd. They lost their power base, and another group came in, the people who are behind Donald Trump. And their job, again, we're talking about Trump, we don't mean exactly Donald Trump, but the people behind them.
Sure.
Okay, and their job is very, very simple. To create a new economic model in a very short period of time, make it work, and save the world.
A very short period of time. Save the world for whom?
Save the world from extinction, from Armageddon, because if they don't, you're going to have complete collapse of the economic system. It's one day we're going to wake up, and we're going to find ourselves living in the world of Mad Max or the world of Blade Runner, one or the other.
So the elite really are concerned about nuclear Armageddon, and they aren't going to run off to their underground bases in the Antarctic and South America. They know that they'll come back onto the surface to find nothing worth lording over. Is that it?
Well, again, this is where the whole process of trans-evolution comes into effect. Where on the one hand, as Catherine always talks about global 1.0, 2.0, 3.0.
Yes,
we have global 1.0, which is beginning with Westphalia in 1648 up until late 1960s when the Bilderbergers meet in 1968 in Mont-Tremblant and Montreal, and they talk about George Ball, Undersecretary for Economic Affairs with JFK and Johnson, talk about the creation of the concept of one world company, limited corporations that have a lot more power than any government on the planet. So we can talk about from that point on global 2.0 corporations, corporate power, versus transnational power versus the nation states. And then right now we're into the post-industrial or world, which is global 3.0. So on the one hand, what they're doing is, again, they're dismantling everything on the planet Earth because progress and development of society is directly proportional to population density. electricity. Leibniz knew about this 300 years ago. Needless to say, the Rockefeller crowd and all these other people know about it as well. If you have progress, you have technology, you have greater population base. On a limited, on a planet with finite natural resources and a limited space and never expanding population base, there's only so much time you have before you run out of food and water and natural resources. So again, they're dismantling everything on the planet Earth and building it up in space. And Catherine talks about this very often when she discusses that they've stolen $40 to $50 trillion, okay, from the economic base here, but that money is being reinvested into space-based economy. And for the first time in history, we're about to become interplanetary civilization. And the whole concept of going from here to there as a future civilization also has an important part in what you were saying before. We might be talking about underground bases, we might be talking about the future Armageddon economic and the consequences of that, but what we're seeing for the first time ever is this whole Trump versus Clinton was a battle for survival of two economic models that simply cannot coexist. They represent completely different concepts. It is a struggle between the transnational power centered in the person of David Rockefeller, now, luckily dead, transnational bankers, which is your World Company Limited, corporations with more power than any government on the planet, globalists, versus the non-American financier centered in the city, which is London, British Empire, Hong Kong, which is World Center for Money Laundering, Drugs, Intelligence, and British Operations, leftover elite circles of the British Empire, the Rothschilds, European elites represented by the old European aristocracy, such as the House of Saxe-Coburg, Austro-Hungarian aristocracy, Ottoman nobility, and on a smaller scale, supported by U.S. intelligence agencies with the exception of the CIA.
Wow.
Okay, and again, if you kind of look at the power base of these people, you understand that they simply cannot coexist. One system is dead, and these people are out. And Trump simply won't work with a liberal crowd in the United States or anywhere else for that matter, be it Russia or Europe, because every economic power base, be it European Central Bank, or International Monetary Fund, World Bank, Federal Reserve, and the central banks around the world, they're all controlled by the liberal crowd behind, the Clintons. And the same thing you could say about Russia.
Right.
Okay.
Hold on, Daniel. Hold on, please. We have to pause for a minute. We'll come right back and pick it up there. Hillary Clinton is back, by the way. She launched her Onward Together PAC today, so she's getting ready to run in 2020. Count on it. Be right back. Okay, welcome back with Daniel Estulin. Let's go back to this group. The election here, Hillary's basically announcing for 2020 again. So she's with the Rockefeller camp, and Trump is with the Rothschild camp. He's surrounded with Zionists and Jews. That's pretty obvious. I mean, this whole thing of Jerry Kushner is enough. It's revolting, and yet it's being done, and the media just seems to ignore it, even though the media is controlled and it could jump all over it, but it won't because it's a Jewish enterprise. So they leave their own alone. They won't mess with them. The big question is, if these people are that worried that Armageddon may happen, why are Trump's generals like Mad Dog Mattis et al. Threatening North Korea, threatening Iran, could easily ignite a major war in Ukraine, could cause Syria to explode into a million bits and pieces, could start a war on the Eastern Front in Europe at any time they want? There are probably 150,000 NATO and American boys and girls standing by on the border to follow orders, which is what military people do. Then you have the South China Sea and other issues. There are hotspots and potentials all over the world for thermonuclear Armageddon. What are the Bilderbergers and others going to do about this? How are they going to shut this down?
Jeff, first of all, the reason for war is simple. Wars write off responsibilities, and that's what these people want to do. It doesn't write off debt, but it does write off responsibilities. And if you kind of look at the people behind, again, Trump has nothing to do with Bilderberg. That's one of the very important things for people to understand.
Nothing to do with Bilderberg. Okay, got it.
I'm hearing a lot in a sense that, he's a billionaire, so he must be part of the Bilderberg conspiracy and the trilaterals and then, all this other stuff. He's not. He's the alternative group. The Bilderbergers are the Clintons and all these other people, the Soroses, the Rockefellers, etc., because they represent the bankers, the financiers,
it's Wall Street.
The liberal crowd, Hollywood, the coasts. Okay, Trump is the alternative group. That doesn't mean that Trump is
Daniel, did you say the cults? The cults?
I didn't. I don't think I said the cults.
All right, but that is another part of this we can get into later. Go ahead.
He represents an alternative group, an alternative interest. It doesn't mean that Trump is one of us. And when I'm hearing a lot of stuff, people saying Trump is one of us, he's going to work for us. Trump doesn't work for us. Trump is another globalist billionaire who works for his own paymasters. It's just at this point in history, their interests of these people and our interests of the 99.9% of the great unwashed, they coincide on certain issues because, again, the point is that the model which has been in place for the past 100 years wouldn't have to go back 500 years to the central banking warfare model. Let's go back to the creation of the Federal Reserve in the last 100 years. That model no longer gives the benefits necessary, and these two groups, which have always agreed on a supranational levels on way to divide the world and rule it, can no longer do it because they represent completely different interests. And so this new group, as I said, with all these other people, European royalty, et cetera, city-states, they have taken over, and no matter what Trump does, one of the things we're seeing in the first month and a half of his presidency, the incredible amount of things that he was able to accomplish, and then he kind of got bogged down, with Syria and everything else. And then
it's like he almost became a different person, Daniel.
He did, but again, and in this case, I love Catherine Austin Fitts, and I listen a lot to her interviews, and what she says, because she was in government, makes a lot of sense. It's not the same thing if you run a corporation and then if you run the government, because again, a company is not a country, and you have to do a lot of things, unsavory things, when you run the government, which you might not do if you're running your own company. And what we're seeing with Trump is after the first month and a half or 2 months of euphoria, people saying, yeah, he's one of us, and then suddenly, a turnaround when he was doing all kinds of things which had nothing to do with the things he promised. And then suddenly over the last, week and a half, 2 weeks, you're getting a glimpse that he might be, reverting back to the way, at least the initial plan before he won the elections. Maybe he's realizing that, if he kowtows to the media, he's still going to be there anyway because he is. Because the corporate media, like everybody else who works for the supranational Bilderberger liberal financier banking crowd, Trump is their enemy. So no matter what he does, he will always be their enemy. They'll do anything
no matter what. That's
to
right.
Their power back.
So you think he may be reverting to his campaign form a little bit?
Jeff, one of the things that, again, the only alternative school to what is happening in the United States is the Russian School of Economics, okay? It's a different language. I don't mean linguistically that they speak Russian and the Americans speak English. I mean from the way of understanding reality. And so the future has, as far as the Russian, intelligence analysis is concerned, and as far as all these different groups looking for an alternative model to replace the central banking warfare model of infinite growth on a finite planet, there are several possibilities, and one of them being debated very much so, and that's one of the things that the American delegation talked to Putin about the first time they spoke on the 20th of January, was the elimination of nation states. In other words, destruction and dismantling Westphalia and the creation of regional blocks. And when I mean regional blocks, I'm not talking about European Union type of a regional economic political bloc. I'm talking about dismantle of countries and creating economic regions.
Oh, they're macro balkanizing the planet. Macro.
Basically, basically, in a nutshell, for that to work, you need a minimum number of people, to be able to sell their, trinkets. And that number of people is 600 million inhabitants. So what we're looking at right now, and again, this comes from a very deep within the Russian intelligence and the Russian government, and again, it's been discussed on the supranational level amongst the Trump crowd, which is the alternative crowd to the Bilderbergers. Regions. One region, for example, would be Canada, the United States, New Zealand, Australia, and parts of Mexico, which would allow you to reach 600 million inhabitants. Currency would be the U.S. dollar. The second group would be Latin America with South Africa and the parts of Mexico that didn't make it into the northern, dollar currency region. Okay, that would be a peso. Then you're looking at Russia, which could be divided by the Urals, and again, it would be voluntarily. Some people would be forced to. They would do it voluntarily. So you have Russia divided by the Ural Mountains into Western Russia, which would join Iran, Turkey, former Soviet-speaking republics, who speak Turkish, Syria, and the Balkans, and Eastern Russia, which would be Russia, South Korea, which was Russian, area of influence back in 1905, Japan and Central Asia. Iran would join the group with Russia and Turkey, and also with Yemen, Bahrain, and the Shiite part of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia as a country would disappear as a nation state, ruined economically, with economic power gone.
That wouldn't bother me at all.
Saudis would break into sectors separated by ethnicity.
Yeah.
Again, this isn't something I'm making up as I go along. Okay, this is seriously discussed on very high supranational levels within the Russian government, European governments, and also in the United States. Then you'd have China or Japan. With China, if Japan cannot close the economic agreement with the Russia-South Korea cluster, and China would simply absorb Japan because Japan is too small and too dependent on the natural resources. And again, then you'd have Western Europe, the Paris-Berlin axis with France's African colonies, because you're looking at the resources and the population. And then another group, and this is very interesting, because you'd have United Kingdom, which is the British Empire, with the Arab countries from Morocco to Saudi Arabia. It means, what could the United Kingdom offer all these Arab countries? The head of Israel on the platter.
Right.
Which is no wonder that 5 years ago, I don't know if you remember this, that both the Rothschilds and Henry Kissinger talked openly about the Israel as a nation state disappearing around 2021.
I heard that.
And no wonder that Arnold Toynbee, one of the most influential British, not only historians, but spies, back in the 1960s...
Toynbee was a spy, you're right. No, people don't remember that, you're right.
He was a lot more important as a spy than he was a historian, although he was a very important British historian. In the 1960s, he said that Israel had a lifespan of no more than 75 years. Okay? And again, the Kissingers and the Rothschilds talked about this, and you could, Google it online. But again, things have changed since Trump came into power because, as you said before, Trump has a lot of influence and pull as far as the Jewish state is concerned, because Kushner and Ivanka, they're both Jews. Okay?
Yeah.
So the whole thing, again, let's go back to what I said earlier, that Crimea was a Rothschild victory against the Rockefellers. It was a 1-0. Then you had the free refugees, then you had Brexit, and then you had Trump. 4-0 against the Rockefeller crowd, the Bilderberg crowd, the liberal, establishment. What does it mean? It means that if Israel is to disappear, the Jews would need to go somewhere. Well, part of these Jews would go back to Crimea. Few people know that Putin and the Rothschild family, they secretly negotiated the Crimean annexation, way back when. So what you're looking at, again, you're looking at the dismantling of the global 2.0 system. World Company Limited joins the new global 3.0 system, as Catherine Austin Fitts calls it, which is networking. And the fight between these two economic models, just as the Clinton versus the Trump, also has its consequences in the conquest of space and the creation of new intergalactic civilization. I talk about this in my book, Trans-Evolution, Becoming Age of Human Deconstruction. But again, if you kind of go back and look at what it all means, it means that we're looking at the dismantling of nation states and the creation of the city-state model, which already exists, and it existed way back in the Middle Ages. Venice, Jeff, is a city-state. Money, diplomacy, shadow power, going back to the Fourth Crusade.
Way
Vatican
back. Yeah.
Is the city-state. Money, banking, religion, intelligence, propaganda, influence. Hong Kong, money, drugs, economic markets.
Monte Carlo, the city of London?
Exactly, the city, which is the epicenter of the British Empire. Singapore, controlled by transnational powers, Japanese Yakuza, Chinese triads, Jewish elite circles, among them the Baruch family, whose roots go back to the 1st century AD, and they're infinitely more powerful and important than the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers or anybody else out there. And these are the families because, again, if you kind of look at the power structures, there's only so much room, Jeff, at this, proverbial table for the elite circles, okay? And the Rockefellers don't have a seat at this table. The Rothschilds
How
might.
Interesting.
But not because they have a lot of money, because, again, money is only one of the key elements, okay? They have the money, but they don't have the blood, okay? And they don't have the peerage, and they don't have the royalty. And if you kind of look at it historically, it has, these are the key elements and how you can actually sit at this proverbial table. Because, again, for example, if you look at the very rich history of Russian culture, the only people who actually had room at this proverbial elite table, they were not the Romanovs that ruled Russia from 1613 to 1917. They were the Rurikhovichi. Rurikhovichi, the only, perhaps you've heard of, Ivan the Terrible.
Sure.
Okay. Well, Ivan the Terrible was one of the key members of this very powerful Russian family, royal family, which ruled Russia for 21 generations, going back to about the 8th century. So these are the kinds of people who have room at this table, and the Baruchs have room at this table because, again, their wealth and their bloodlines go back to the 1st century AD. And these are the kinds of things you don't see, obviously, on Google search engine or anywhere else for that matter. So it doesn't really matter, what the Bilderbergers are talking about. What is important is that the people behind Trump are the ones who actually put him in the White House.
Okay, question. A lot of talk about America and other nations in deep space already, with deep space ships, which have transited all around the solar system. We've been on Mars for 20, 30 years. There is evidence that things are going on the moon, on Mars, that are quite obviously of intelligent nature. Your thoughts on that's a whole area of discussion. But what do you think about that? Are we out in space, Daniel?
How I touch these areas.
Yeah.
I absolutely believe that to be true. Again, because these are the kinds of issues that invite a lot of conspiracy crazies into the discussion. And then, before long, we start hurtling into the world of the Queen Lizard being the, Queen of England.
She's eating mice for lunch. Yeah.
Far away from that as possible. But needless to say, and again, I go into that and I explain it in my book, Trans-Evolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction, because I create this three-dimensional model for the future of humanity. As we're dismantling things on a planet Earth, we're building up things into space. And to do that, we need three things. First of all, as you had 500 and 400 years ago, the terrestrial empires were those who controlled the sea lanes. The British Empire, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spaniards. Well, now the old sea lanes are the space lanes.
There you go.
Which is one of the reasons you have all these nations, the Americans, the British.
Well, that's where the Silk Road is going to end up, right?
Well, that's one of the key elements of the Silk Road. Yeah, the terrestrial Silk Road, which is, again, Americans temporarily are withdrawing, into their nation state, and the Chinese are taking over that part of globalization, okay? But also, the space age, the space civilization, or the intergalactic civilization, as Catherine calls it, that's certainly up and running because, again, you have all these satellites being launched into space, and, via satellites you control, near Earth orbit and also far Earth orbit, which is, space colonization. And, second thing you're obviously going to need another currency. You can't have dollars and rubles and pesos and euros in space, especially if you have people living on the moon, which is, going to be a generation from now.
It'll
be a new currency, which is digital.
Well, it'll be all digital, cashless, of course. Yeah.
And that's why one of the reasons we're seeing the elimination of, of the paper currency, one of many reasons. Of course, control is another. And the third element is you need a new platform. That's when we were getting into the 5G smartphones. Okay? So this entire structure of our world, Jeff, is changing so rapidly. That
Absolutely.
People who live I kind of look at it, Jeff, as these generals, who are just, imagine we're in 2017, and you have these generals who somehow travel back in time and they see these other generals defending the Maginot Line in 1914. Okay, and you say to them, what are you doing exactly when we're using space-age technology, nanotechnology? Future wars are going to be fought between, cyborgs and machines against soldiers, who are biologically created and not even human anymore.
Well, robots. AI,
exactly.
Of course.
And that's the future, the near future of humanity. And against that backdrop, you have the financial meltdown of the entire world economy, and you have the Trump crowd needing to create a new economic system. Otherwise, the entire world is going to collapse onto itself. And that's the reality of what we're seeing today. And Bilderberg is just one of the many nodes on the supranational level working with the liberal crowd to try and save their model from
one
extinction.
Of many
and of course, it
nodes.
has been extinct.
One of many nodes. Wow. You're amazing. Now, I always knew you were amazing, but you have picked up so much knowledge and wisdom since we last talked. I don't know. Do you sleep at night, Daniel?
I'm not sure.
Really?
I'm getting smarter with age.
You're synthesizing enormous amounts of crucial reality. I won't call it truth, reality. And that's where we're all headed. How much time do we have? And what do you think? All right, let me rephrase that. Do you think somebody's going to screw it up and there'll be a nuclear war? 50-50?
I mean, I think, Paul Craig Roberts talked about just how close we are. I think we are close.
Yeah.
I think the crazies in Washington actually believe that they can win the nuclear war against Russia and China.
If I read correctly what I'm reading, even between the lines, they do believe that a nuclear war is winnable.
The Russians have incredible, futuristic technologies which these people don't know anything about.
You're right. You are so right, Daniel.
I hope that they take Putin seriously, because again, this whole demonization of Putin, it has nothing to do that Russians are bad, that Putin is a dictator. It has to do with the concept that the model that he represents is not a model that the people who run the world from behind the scenes. Let's talk about deep state. Okay, we know what deep state is. So deep state doesn't want China and Russia working together.
Right. No.
They want the other economic model, and they're going to go. Hopefully, somebody is going to be smart enough to say, "Hey, we can't win this thing. So let's make a deal."
See, Putin has it figured out. Putin's got it figured out. He knows. He knows what our chances.
The problem with Russia, Jeff, and I know we don't have a lot of time, the problem with Russia is, what a lot of people don't understand is that Putin only controls foreign policy. The people who control national policy and Russia's economy, they're the same people who were put there 25 years ago by the Clinton crowd. They're the same liberal traitors who work for the interests of the Bilderbergers and the Soroses and the Rockefellers. And up until Trump's election, a lot of the times people say to me, if that's the case, why doesn't he get rid of Medvedev, the prime minister? Why doesn't he get rid of the president of Russia's central bank, or director of Russian central bank, of the minister of the economy? He couldn't. Because these people were put there by the Clintons, or the people behind the Clintons, back in the early 1990s when the Russian state, the Soviet Union melted away. And if Putin were to eliminate these people before Trump came into power, that would have been a declaration of war against their interests, and they would have literally cut access, not only, via sanctions, but to Russia's access to SWIFT and chips, which meant that Russia would have had no access to world currency or world money supply. And that would have meant that Putin would have had only one way out, the nuclear option. And to prevent the nuclear option, which would have meant the destruction of the entire world, Putin preferred to keep these people and minimize the damage. And the result of that Russia as a country, economically speaking, is in a terrible condition.
We've just been privy to hearing some extraordinary material, only just a fraction of which Daniel has access to. Now, you've just said that you do buy into the deep space program, that we're involved in technologies that the average person on this planet would never dream of. We're out there. We've been out there. We don't want to go into that right now because it'll draw too much negative flack from people who just can't accept that. Fine. Okay. What about our ultimate chances that Donald Trump is going to, is he capable of leading this nation into a nuclear attack on North Korea, for example?
I don't know, Jeff. I mean, Trump is so many things to so many different people, and we've seen his.
That's a very, very adroit statement.
Schizophrenia, I think, is the best way to describe it.
That's correct. Yes.
We're talking about Russia. I just want to, kind of close the circle on that. For Russia, because again, I come from the Russian military counterintelligence, so I understand this perhaps better than most people. For Russia, Trump's victory is both excellent news and also a curse. On the one hand, it reduces the chances of an armed conflict. But on the other hand, even if Putin and Trump reach an agreement, in Russia, Putin has no team in place. Okay? So they too can, reach an agreement, but then somebody has to execute it. And there's nobody trained enough on the one hand in Russia to carry out the execution of these agreements economically speaking, because all skilled professionals have been extirpated by the liberal elite and removed from access to Kremlin, including two of Russia's most brilliant economists, Glaziev and Khazin. And, Trump is an alpha macho or macho alpha, so is Putin, but Trump is not going to beat around the bush. If Putin can't or won't do what needs to be done to make the bilateral relationship work and basically help eliminate Trump's liberal enemies, Trump will seek new alliances that could exclude and ultimately remove Putin from power. Because what remains beyond doubt is that Trump, with one stroke, has eliminated two powerful Rockefeller-backed clans. Mm-hmm. The Bushes, okay, we talk about Jeb Bush candidacy, thus effectively putting an end to their political aspirations.
That's right.
And also, the Clintons, and, you're talking about Hillary Clinton coming back in 2020. I think it's wishful thinking. However, the war is not over. We're entering a period of great uncertainty and existential danger. And one of the reasons is because Russia is not strong. And people talk about, the triumvirate, the Americans, the Chinese, and the Russians, the three elements working together or working against each other. The Russians, if you're talking about a chess game, Russia is a chess board, and the game is being played between the Americans and the Chinese. Unfortunately, Russia is just not strong enough to really play an important role individually in this. They would need to work together with the Chinese, which is, the One Belt, One Road initiative, which is taking place as we speak right now in China, is an important factor in understanding Russia's future position. Will they position themselves together with China against the interest of the United States? Or how will this thing work out? Because again, depending on the decision that Putin makes or takes, a lot will be decided short-term, history-wise, for the world over the next few days.
Wow. Daniel, thank you for being here again. Let's not wait another 10 years.
Absolutely. Have me on in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Update.
Thank you, Daniel. All right.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Great to have you on again. Thanks. Be well.
Take care.
All
Bye-bye.
Right. Daniel Esterlin, just an extraordinary mind. Absolutely extraordinary. 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 Absolutely extraordinary.